Hello everyone and welcome to the rectory for Billy and Derry Keehan. Got a tired dog here. There's been a couple of animal stories in the news of the great length that farmers have gone to safeguard their stock. Particularly one I noticed from Switzerland, where it's the time of year that the cows are brought down from the higher Alps into lower pasture, and a cow that was badly lame, and instead of letting it walk any further, the Swiss farmer called for a helicopter and a winch, and the cow was transported safely back to lower pasture. Not in this case a good shepherd, but a good cow herd. But God's people have always needed shepherds, and maybe God's people have always been sheep, the sheep of his pasture. Take Gideon, one of the judges, one of the shepherds of Israel, from the time when they moved into Canaan initially and before there was any kings. God used judges to rule over his people. Each of them were called individually, and each of them had great gifts and talents. Gideon was a farmer. He was the younger son of a farmer, a very small farm from a very small tribe. Gideon in no way felt that he was fit and able to do what God asked him to do, which was to fight the Midianites. But he did, and of course he proved himself a very able military commander. First of all, God sent an angel to tell him what he wanted to do. Gideon was quite humbled by it. And then, having received that assurance from God, Gideon became quite brave, breaking down the pagan altars, trying to reunite the tribes of Israel into some sort of fighting formation and to take on the Midianites. And Gideon was not afraid to ask for God's approval, just to make sure that God was going to bless what he was going to do. And that, of course, brings us to the story of the sheepskins. You all know the most famous sheepskin in the Bible is Gideon's. I have here a little Jack Russell size sheepskin here, which, oh, very handsome, Rusty. A dog in sheep's clothing. You've seen it here, folks. You've seen it here. But Gideon's sheepskin would have been more or less like this one. And he asked for God's favour simply by asking God, I know you will be with me and you will bless me if the ground is full of dew and the sheepskin is dry, or if the sheepskin is sopping wet and the ground is dry. And so that miracle was provided, giving Gideon the confidence to go and unite the tribes. Initially, he had over 30,000 Israelites to fight with, but he was a very canny military commander. He, in fact, knew such a large force who probably didn't really want to be there, for they were farmers themselves and they didn't want to leave their families, didn't want to go and fight. So he asked everyone who was afraid and fearful to go home. 20,000 went home. That left him only 10,000 or so. He then set a test for the remaining. He asked them to drink from the water, and if they lapped the water like a dog would lap the water, they were sent home. And he was left with only 300 men who he felt were wise enough in that they didn't lap the water, but they took it into their hands and drank it, therefore keeping alert and able to see the enemy at all times, he felt. And indeed he was right, that small force would be better than a large army. And so, yes, he was able to infiltrate the Midianite camp and scare them and frighten them. He also was a very good negotiator and a politician and a mediator between the tensions and his own Israelite tribes. But it so happened that, yes, he gave Israel peace for a generation. Gideon left Israel at peace, and when his achievements were finished, he was asked to be a king. Be a king over us, let your sons be kings over us. And it is to Gideon's crowning achievement, he rejected that. He said, I am not your king, God is your king. God alone is your king, and he refused that. But of course, it was only for a generation that Gideon gave peace. The enemies of Israel would start up again, and indeed the questions about a king would rise up again until Samuel would have to deal with that issue. And sadly, the people rejected God as their king. They wanted a human king like all their neighbours had, and all their neighbours seemed to get on so very well. They wanted to keep up with the Joneses and broke God's heart, and God reluctantly gave them Saul as a king of their own. So Gideon, one of the great shepherds of his people, and indeed if it's a story you maybe haven't heard read since Sunday school days, go and read it. Go and read about the judges of Israel. Not just men, there was Deborah too. So men and women used mightily by God. But in terms of good shepherds, well, we all know the 23rd Psalm, but I thought there is a lovely version of it from the Native American, and this is translated from the Native American Sign Language. The great Father above is a shepherd chief. I am his, and I am with him. I want not. He throws out to me a rope, and the name of the rope is love. And he draws me to where the grass is green, and the water is not dangerous, and I eat and lie down, satisfied. Sometimes my heart is very weak and falls down, but he lifts it up again, and draws me onto a good road. His hand is wonderful. Sometime it may be very soon, it may be longer. It may be a long, long time. He will draw me into a place between the mountains. It is dark there. But I'll not draw back, I'll not be afraid. For it is there between the mountains that the shepherd chief will meet me, and the hunger I have felt in my heart all through this life will be satisfied. Sometimes he makes the love rope into a whip, but afterwards he gives me a staff to lean on. He spreads a table before me with all kinds of good. He puts his hand upon my head, and all the tired is gone. My cup he fills till it runs over. What I tell is true, I lie not. These roads that lie away ahead will stay with me through this life, and afterwards I will go to live in the big teepee and sit down with the chief shepherd evermore. And I'll say amen to that. And just as one of you listeners asked me to talk about Gideon, if there's any subject or anything you'd like me to give a little meditation on, all you have to do is message me. Don't be afraid. I enjoy looking things up, and I enjoy myself finding out something new, or maybe remembering something that I had forgotten, because I have forgotten quite a bit. So I shall leave my sheepdog. I shall leave my sheepdog in peace, and we will see you soon. Bye-bye.